Good morning, welcome. Welcome everybody. It is extremely wonderful to see you all. I'm very, very happy. It was, well, 3 years ago we wanted to meet here in this place. Many of you have, were signed up 3 years ago and you're here now, and then several others have joined as well. So it is extremely wonderful that we are finally able to gather here after this long pandemic delay. Back in 2020, when we had to cancel the original conference, which was exactly 3 years ago, we were one of the first of many global cancellations, and I remember everybody being very disappointed, so I'm very happy that we're here now and that we can have this chance to gather in person. Many of us have met on Zoom. And many of us have known each other from before, and it's so wonderful and important to have this chance to gather in person. So we have here around not everyone has reached here yet, but we will have well over 500 people. And when I did a little count of the countries, I believe it's around 70 countries. So a good third, more than a third of the world, from every continent, except Antarctica. The penguins are still behaving, I believe. And so I find that really remarkable, actually. From every continent, we have people who've traveled here. And I think that there's actually someone who has literally traveled across the world, from the Cook Islands. Are you here, Jessica? Amazing. That's a very long way to come. Thank you for coming here especially. And your jet lag must be horrendous. And everybody has traveled across the Atlantic. I hope you're waking up, and I hope you've had a chance to get lots of coffee. Because this is going to be quite a busy conference. We're going to have a set of keynote presentations every day. We have 3 lined up, very exciting speeches after the coffee break. And then we have 50 parallel sessions over the next 3 days. And I know that's a little bit overwhelming. So I want you to pick and choose, and particularly try and go to some things that you don't know about. Because that's the point here, right? To try and learn something new and make connections with people that you haven't met before. So, why would we all go to this huge expense and trouble to travel all the way to Oxford? It's because for 2 things we want to achieve here. One is the learning about this subject, and there's such a diversity of things being covered in this conference. But of course it's also to make new friends, to make new connections, and to make new collaborations that you then carry on beyond this. So what's really quite wonderful about this also is that this conference is really very multi-sectoral. So although the vast majority of everybody here is coming back from a research or practitioner or pracademic background, we also have quite a lot of governments who have joined us, around 40 different governments. And that is largely courtesy of our conference partner, the Global Wildlife Program. And so it's really also very important that this is not just an academic conference. This is very much trying to get all the different sectors to work together. Now, human-wildlife conflict, of course, is a hugely interdisciplinary subject. So we have people here, a lot of natural scientists, a lot of social scientists. We have people who work in mediation, peace building, economics, law, and we have sessions on all of these different topics. So what we tend to do a little bit with human-wildlife conflict is cluster into species. And we have the wrong slide. There we go. That's where everybody's come from today, which is pretty impressive. And we tend to look at which species we work on. So who here works on elephants, or has an interest in elephants, or comes from a country that has trouble with elephants? Can you see how many hands? I would love to be able to count these really quick, but it's a lot. So basically, 1/4 of the world's countries have elephants, and every single country that has elephants has problems with elephants. And that's 37 countries in Africa and 13 in Asia. And it doesn't even really matter how many elephants you have, whether it's tens of thousands, like in India or some of the range states in southern Africa, or if you only have 100 elephants, as countries like Vietnam. It is a concern, and we're seeing this everywhere now. So, however, we tend to focus very much on the iconic cats, the elephants, the species, but of course, we do have a huge range of species affected by human-wildlife conflict. And for example, we have a number of shark human-wildlife conflict experts here too. Who here works on sharks? Not as many as elephants. However, I really think that the people who work on elephants should talk to people who work on sharks. And you might think, well, why on earth would I do that? Because what do human-elephant conflict and human-shark conflict have in common? Humans. And this is the entry point for transferable lessons, basically. What everybody has in common here is issues with this human, the social, the political side of these problems. And so you will find that throughout the program there is a little bit of an overemphasis on the social side, but that is deliberate, because I think that is where many of the cross-learnings can particularly happen. So what we've got in this conference is two things you need to do. One is learn something that you didn't know, and I don't mean a small fact, but a new way of looking at these issues. Go to some sessions that are completely unfamiliar, and make as many connections and friends as you possibly can. Use these 3 days for that, primarily. That's why you came here in person. We, throughout, are going to have quite long breaks. The coffee breaks are long. That's deliberate. That's for you to have maximum time to have your side meetings and to build those collaborations. Now, I'm here wearing several hats, but I'm going to speak to you wearing my hat of IUCN Specialist Group on Human-Wildlife Conflict and Coexistence. We're hosting this conference together with the Global Wildlife Program of the World Bank and the Wildlife Conservation Research Unit of Oxford University. And we will have several more talks after this, and also some guest videos from those partners. So let me tell you very, very quickly a little bit how this came about. We planned this conference originally in 2018. So it's been kind of 5 years in the making. And the specialist group itself is only about 7 years old. And this group is, what we've done so far, and what the role of the group is primarily to try and convene knowledge, to put it together, and to make it available. And the first thing we did in the beginning years was build a very large global library. And I think many of you know this already. And this was built by our program officer, James Stevens, who keeps this constantly updated and keeps on adding to it and building on it. And many of your papers and documents are in here. The other thing that we have become more recently very engaged with, and which is hugely important, is that, as you probably know, human-wildlife conflict is now in the Global Biodiversity Framework. So at COP15 in December, when the framework was approved, for the first time ever, human-wildlife conflict is in a global policy document. Now, this is really important because, firstly, it acknowledges that this issue is global and that every one of these 196 parties is concerned about this. And what I find is that this is truly, every country deals with human-wildlife conflict to varying extents, but it is not limited to the global south or the global north or any other part of the world. And so many organizations for the last 3 years, over the pandemic years, have been working really, really hard to make sure that this wording is right and that it is in the framework. Our specialist group worked on that, but many other organizations too, including WWF, really pushed to have this text in there. So in a way, this conference is now very, very timely because this is very fresh. It's 3 months old. And here we are now, asking the questions, well, what are we going to really start to do about this in a concerted effort? Even though it's certainly not a new topic, but it's one that's now really on the global stage. So one of the things that we've also been working on in the specialist group for a number of years is to put together a kind of global manual, kind of global guidelines on human-wildlife conflict. This is a classic IUCN type of product. This is intended to be guidance as well as policy. And so we have just finished this document. It's been many years of work, and we're going to launch it today, later on today. And this evening, I'll show it to you. We'll have a reception down there in the marquee, and you'll be able to access it online later today. But I'm going to give you a very quick sneak preview. So how does one go about creating a global manual for human-wildlife conflict when you're dealing with everything from sharks to elephants and everything from large ranching communities to smallholders and indigenous groups and everything else? Well, what we've done is not focus on species. What we've done is try and figure out what are some of the transferable principles and the foundation, the principles that if they are applied to any case, will help. And so to give you a bit of a preview, there's 5. And the first of these is do no harm. Now this might sound a little bit strange, but human-wildlife conflict, as you know from where you work, is a very delicate issue. And a lot can go wrong, and a lot can unravel, and there can be unintended consequences and all sorts. So the very first thing is think ahead. Think about what can happen, what your own role in the situation is. The second is to really fully understand context. And I don't mean just the symptoms of it, but what is going on underneath the surface. What are the social, the political histories, injustices of the past, grievances, all these things come into what is going on in the present. The third is collaboration with all of us here, but also to lead any kind of initiatives through communities. So collaboration in every conceivable way. The fourth is to infuse it with science, whatever the best we can, but also to start integrating this international policies. And we have several sessions on policy during this conference, because it's so fresh out of the GBF and it's very timely. And finally, it's to think about sustainability. How do communities and people who are living with wildlife continue to do that? How can they be independent of donors? How can they continue to get benefit from wildlife and not retaliate against it? And how do we keep the species population safe? Okay, so I'm going to wrap this up, but I want to, before I do that, thank the many, many other organizations that have pitched in and have got really excited about this conference and wanted to help out. And so we have many, many partners in this, and I'm super grateful to Fondation Segre, to Elephant Family, whose trustees are arriving tomorrow, the Rufford Foundation, Tusk Trust, I saw down somewhere. Yep, thank you. WCN, I think JG and colleagues are here as well. Lion Landscapes, our partner here in Oxford. The Africa Oxford Initiative, which funded several African delegates to come here. The International Conservation Foundation of Canada, which funded yesterday's reception. IUCN SOS, and the Tiger Program, which run a lot of human-wildlife conflict projects. USAID and the Coexistence Trust, which again sponsored yesterday's, for those who came to yesterday's reception. IIED, again, flew in several people. There's a lot of sessions about financial instruments and so on, which are going to be super interesting. Please go to those. Wild Philanthropy and Ecotone are sponsors, and they're exhibiting over in the coffee area. The journal's Frontiers has a special section just on human-wildlife conflict. There's a brand new journal called Integrative Conservation run by Chief Editor Ahimsa Campos Arces, are you here? And he's looking for submissions. Steer all your papers to the Ahimsa. And finally, the British Asian Trust, which is also one of the major supporters of the conference. So thank you very much, and you're all here, and thank you for coming, helping make this possible. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. And what I'd like to do now is not hand over, but show you a couple of quick videos. So the acting executive secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, David Cooper, wanted to join us, in person couldn't, has kindly sent us a video message. And the chair of the IUCN Species Survival Commission, Jean-Paul Rodriguez, also could not make it in person and has sent us a video. I'll show those quickly now, if it works.
Greetings from Montreal. I'd like to begin by thanking the Human Wildlife Conflict and Coexistence Specialist Group of the IUCN Species Survival Commission, the Global Wildlife Programme, and the Wildlife Conservation Research Unit at Oxford University's Department of Zoology for the invitation to join you today. As you know, last December, at the UN Biodiversity Conference in Montreal, governments adopted the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework with the aim of halting and reversing the loss of biodiversity and putting nature on a path to recovery by 2030 for the benefit of people and the planet. This is a highly ambitious plan. Its goals include halting human-induced extinctions, restoring the abundance of wild species, and ensuring that nature's contributions to people are maintained and enhanced, supporting sustainable development. The framework includes 23 action targets, areas where action is required now to achieve results by 2030. Several of these targets relate directly to sustainable wildlife management, to reduce overexploitation, but also to ensure that the management and use of wild species provides benefits for people, especially those living in vulnerable situations and those most dependent on biodiversity. Specifically, Target 4 calls for the effective management of human-wildlife interactions to minimize human-wildlife conflict for coexistence. We know that human-wildlife conflict is one of the most pressing challenges to biodiversity conservation and sustainable use. It leads to the loss of crops and livestock, damage to property and infrastructure, increased risk of disease, personal injury, and death. It damages livelihoods and can undermine conservation efforts and efforts to achieve sustainable use. Many of the drivers of biodiversity loss, including land use change and climate change, are exacerbating human-wildlife conflict. The Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework includes targets to address these and other drivers of biodiversity loss. It also calls for integrated and inclusive planning and management processes, respecting the role of Indigenous peoples and local communities. Moreover, the framework recognizes Indigenous peoples and local communities as custodians of biodiversity and as partners in its conservation and sustainable use. And it includes a target, Target 22, to ensure their full, equitable, inclusive, and effective participation in decision-making. The framework in Target 23 also calls for a gender-responsive approach. This is important considering that the effects of human-wildlife conflict on food and economic security, increased workload, and decreased well-being are often higher for women. These examples underline that addressing human-wildlife conflict and promoting coexistence requires a holistic and participatory approach, just as implementation of the Kunming-Montreal framework as a whole must be a whole-of-government, whole-of-society effort. As countries and stakeholders grapple with these issues to address human-wildlife conflict and face the task of turning the words of the framework into action, this conference is particularly timely. I'm sure that the discussions here will help participants address these challenges. I wish you fruitful discussions. I thank you.
So David Cooper and the team at the CBD Secretariat were very kind to send us that. And we do have one a delegate from the CBD Secretariat as well, Mariano Castro, who's giving a keynote tomorrow on the policy context as well. Can't see Mariano, but I think he's here somewhere. Hi, so many people. Okay, now a lot of people here are part of the Species Survival Commission in a group or other. Show of hands maybe, are you part of an SSC group? A few, great. And we're actually going to have a session especially on that later today, because what we want to do is bring the species knowledge and the interdisciplinary knowledge again together. Now, John Paul Rodriguez, the chair of the commission, again, was not able to join us, but has also sent us a quick little video.
Dear all, how are you? My name is John Paul Rodriguez. I chair the IUCN Species Survival Commission. As you know, this meeting at the International Conference on Human-Wildlife Conflict and Coexistence is organized by the specialist group with the same name, which is a group of the SSC, one of 178 groups around the world that gather over 8,500 specialists. This is a really important topic, a topic that crosses across many of our specialist groups, many of our themes, many of the countries, many of the regions, many of the taxa. Animals, plants, and fungi all are affected. But many fungi are not really the major source of conflict, of human-wildlife conflict, but animals and plants for sure. For example, I was just a few weeks ago in India at the Asian Elephant Specialist Group meeting, and the really big challenge is that although they have been super successful at recovering the Asian elephant in India, there's no space. All the protected areas where elephants can live are pretty much full or almost there. So the big challenge now is, how do we deal with growing successful conservation populations and human space as well. So I wish you all the best. You'll be in the best company. I'm really sorry not to be able to be there with you. Gabriela Lichtenstein, who's the regional vice chair for Meso South America of the SSC, is there on my behalf. Many thanks, Gabriela, for doing this. There's not much more that I want to say except to wish you the greatest success in this conference. Again, this is a theme that is growing and expanding, very relevant for many, many groups of species around the world. I wish you all the best of luck, success, and look forward to the next meeting where I hope they'll be able to join you. So thank you very much. Until next time, success.
So John Paul kindly gave away what was supposed to be a little bit of a secret, but I think it has got out that this is likely to not be a one-off conference. He was referring to the next one. And so yes, it is the intention that this is the first global, and that probably we will take the next few around the continents. So perhaps the next conference will be either in Africa or in Asia, so that we can really focus on regions, and we maybe over the next 10 to 15 years have several of these. It will certainly not be next year, I can tell you that. We need a little bit more time to prepare these sort of things. But yeah, we will continue this, I think. Okay, I would like to now introduce Lisa Farroway from the Global Wildlife Program, who have co-organized this with us, and Lisa's going to tell us about their work.
Thanks, Alex, and good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm delighted that the Global Wildlife Program is a partner in this conference. So for those of you that don't know, the Global Wildlife Program is a global partnership on combating illegal wildlife trade, building wildlife-based economies, and mitigating human-wildlife conflict. It's financed by the Global Environment Facility, or the GEF. It's led by the World Bank, and it has a range of incredible partners that you can see on the slide here, and some of them are at this conference. But the real leaders are the participating countries in the program. This is the engine room of the Global Wildlife Program. This is where the magic happens. And these are the countries across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and the Caribbean that chose to prioritize their GEF resources towards wildlife conservation, towards combating illegal wildlife trade, towards mitigating human-wildlife conflict. We have 31 countries currently working on projects in the Global Wildlife Program. You can see them shown in green. We're delighted that we've just selected 15 countries to participate in the GEF 8 phase of the program, which is called Wildlife Conservation for Development Integrated Program. You can see those shown in yellow, and that's currently being established now. We are super pumped that we have some repeat customers, countries that have come back for more, and they're the ones shown in green with the hatch. And the World Bank leads a knowledge management platform that helps all of these countries, connect, share, and learn from each other. We have 20 participating GWP governments represented here today. I want to give a shout out to them and thank you for this leadership on this issue. I'm going to ask everyone that's here with the GWP to go ahead and put your hand up so people can see where you are. Front row here too, please. Okay. You may see them with their GWP cap on that my friend here, Richard from Kenya, is wearing in the front row. Show them your cap. If you see one of these, do go ahead, say hi. They have an incredible amount of expertise. They're so interested to share it with you, and they really want to hear yours also. And because this issue is so important to the Global Wildlife Program and the participating countries, we're so pleased to be a supporting partner. And at the World Bank, we see nature loss as a development issue. So biodiversity and ecosystem services are critical for economic development, and they're such an important part of green, resilient, and inclusive development. And human-wildlife conflict is a development issue. That's why we're here. It's not just a conservation issue. This is a social issue. It's a development issue. And the losses or damages from human-wildlife conflict can have catastrophic economic consequences, and these are most often felt by the poor. I can see people nodding. You know this more than me. This is what you deal with in your day-to-day lives. And at the World Bank, we did a study looking at the economic benefits to local communities from protected area tourism. And in the same study, we looked at, well, what are some of the costs that communities are incurring from living near wildlife, including through human-wildlife conflict? And you can see on this slide the data from Lower Zambezi. And on the left, tourism. Tourism at $6 million per year to incomes. Now look on the right, you can see the economic costs from human-wildlife conflict. 1.8 million total reported crop loss per year. So just in these communities, human-wildlife conflict was eroding almost 2/3 of the incomes that were being generated through nature-based tourism. And it's not just economic impacts, as you all know. It's risks to food security. So in Bhutan, in some sites, 30% of crops are lost to wild animals, including where there's a heavy reliance on those crops for home consumption. It impacts on education. At some sites in both Uganda and Tanzania, 60% of children have been reported as missing school to guard crops. Think about it, 60% of children are missing school classes to guard crops and protect them from wildlife. And importantly, there are gender differentiated impacts. In India, damage to water pipes caused by elephants has added extra burden to women who need to walk to fetch water. And as crop yields have been impacted, women have been reported as stretching the food supply by eating less. These are critical development impacts. I'm sure we'll hear many more over the next few days as we discuss how we can mitigate human-wildlife conflict and address the underlying drivers. Human-wildlife conflict is an increasing issue. It's a fact that we don't want to say, but I think most people here understand that it's increasing in severity. Last year, the Global Wildlife Program did a survey of governments, and we asked, what are your perceptions on human-wildlife conflict? And one of the questions that we asked was, in your country, do you think human-wildlife conflict is increasing? And over 70% of respondents said, yes, it is increasing. And this trend held across all regions. So globally, we heard human-wildlife conflict is increasing. And this was particularly marked in low-income countries, where 85% of respondents said human-wildlife conflict is an increasing issue. I mentioned earlier that we're establishing the GEF 8 phase of our program, Wildlife Conservation for Development. And this slide shows how the focus of the program has evolved over time. So in 2015, when the Global Wildlife Program was established by the GEF, it was established to prevent poaching, trafficking, and demand for illegal wildlife products, particularly looking at high-profile trafficking of elephant ivory, rhinoceros horn, pangolin scales from Africa to Asia. In 2019, with the second phase of the program, that continued, but there was added emphasis on how can communities and local economies benefit from healthy wildlife populations through wildlife-based economies. And this year, right now, with the third phase, alongside that, you see human-wildlife coexistence brought in its own right as an equally prominent issue. And human-wildlife conflict has always been there as part of projects addressing illegal wildlife trade and wildlife-based economy, but now it's recognized in its own right. And if you look at the countries that applied to join the program, it was a competitive process. The number one mentioned issue on why they wanted to join was human-wildlife conflict. So over 90% of the submissions we received said human-wildlife conflict is an important issue for them to address, and it's a priority for biodiversity conservation in their country. This was more countries that said they needed to address poaching or illegal wildlife trade, and more that said they needed to address wildlife overexploitation. So it's a very important issue for the GWP. I also recall at the CITES workshop last year on sustainable financing for African elephants, not sure if anyone else was there, but so many of the range states that spoke about their priorities for elephant conservation said the number one issue they're facing is human-wildlife conflict. Again and again we said that, so this is such an important issue, which is why it's great to be here at this conference. So it's clear that the multifaceted nature of this issue spans wildlife and people. Alex just said one of the principles is about working together. So we know that to sufficiently manage this, it can't just be managed by one sector or agency alone. We need partnerships, we need bridges across disciplines, we need to make sure governments are at the center given their critical role, and it needs to be in partnership with local communities. It requires effective national and policy frameworks that can help, span these sectors and bring a coordinated approach. We are coordinating a session at 4:15 p.m. today in the East Room, which is that room just there, on national policies. And we're going to have a number of government representatives talking about how national policies in their country are helping address this issue. So if you're interested, please do come along. We'd love to welcome you there. So the challenge is significant, but it's so positive to see the increasing attention on human-wildlife conflict and to see everyone that's joined today. Thank you for being here and paying attention to this issue. I'm really excited to hear all of your experiences and learn from you. And you can count on the Global Wildlife Program to help share your experiences, help replicate lessons across the Global Wildlife Program, and support you through our knowledge platform. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I'm going to call up Amy Dickman, new director of the Wildlife Conservation Research Unit at Oxford.
Thank you, everyone, and it's a huge pleasure to be here today, and just immense thanks before I forget to everyone who has made this a reality after 3 extremely arduous years, not for me, I'm just here trying to get the glory at the end, but particularly to Alex and to James and to the entire Human-Wildlife Conflict Specialist Group who have really pulled together. The guidelines have been an epic amount of work, but just putting this together has been incredible. So it is a real pleasure, as I said, to be here with you all. It's less of a pleasure, I have to say, to be asked to talk for 20 minutes about conflict to a group of people who are world leaders in this topic. Whatever I talk about with conflict, there are at least 50 people in this room who know it about 100 times better than I do. And then I could talk about all the work that Wild Crew does, as Alex mentioned, as the new director. David, though, we've got David here with 35 years of experience, and he's going to be presenting all the science that happened, based around the Wild Crew work about conflict. So, if I can't impress you with the science, which I can't, and I can't tell you much of what you don't know already, because I can't do that either, what can I do? So I thought it would be more useful maybe to bring this right down. You've heard a huge amount about the global scale of this. We all know it's an epic challenge that we all face, but how do we actually try to advance this forward? And I think a lot of that then comes down to the kinds of work we all do on the ground in our sort of daily lives tackling these things. And it's by sharing those kinds of experiences that I think we can also help advance our own project. So I'm going to give more of a personal experience really into this, and focusing particularly on how to put people at the heart of human-wildlife conflict and coexistence solutions. So, like many of you, I suspect, I didn't get into this for the people. We know that people are central. It's right there, the H in human-wildlife conflict, right at the beginning. And at the beginning, I managed to completely ignore it. Because I got into this because I loved big cats. It was very shallow, it was very selfish, but hey, I was like, hey, they're pretty. Who can't love them? And when I looked at them, my knowledge growing up largely in the UK was of watching wildlife on documentaries, seeing these incredible cats. All this is the imagery that we grew up on. There isn't a person in that photo. There probably actually are people in those photos, but they're way blurred out in the background. The focus is on the wildlife. And so when I sort of thought about building a career in this sort of field, I really wanted to go to a place that had sort of, large carnivores in particular at the heart of it. And I really focused on Wild Crew. As soon as I knew about it, I used to devour David's books. I'm not just saying this to impress him. I've stopped now. And so I was like, this is the most amazing place to actually work for this. And not because of the highfalutin science and the fact it was at Oxford, because it seemed that as soon as you turned up at Oxford, you got literally handed a big cat to study. So there was David with lions, and David with cheetahs, and Arjun with tigers, and Mohammed with leopards. And I was like, this is just the place. This is where I'm going to just have this wonderful, wonderful interaction with big cats. And so I was lucky enough, after doing a zoology degree, to get an undergraduate scholarship with Wild Crew, and I arrived super nervous to meet the iconic Professor David MacDonald and to find out what I was going to be studying. And I walked into this room with him to find out, which big cat was going to launch my career. And he said, you've got to work on water shrews. And I was like, okay. Now, it's big for a shrew, but it's about 15,000 times smaller than a lion. So I was like, yeah, it's not really what I came here for. But you've got to put in the hard yards, so I started to work on water shrews. I use the term work lightly. I don't believe these exist in the UK. I didn't see one of them. And I kind of whined to David about this sort of stuff and how I wanted to work on something bigger. And so he was like, right, bigger? You want bigger? No problem. So he said, I really think you're cut out to do a PhD on water voles. And I was like, no. That looks really boring. Sorry, Tom. It's not that boring, but it just wasn't really what I wanted to work on. And so I finally was whining. So I came here to work on carnivores, and finally I got to work for a little bit on carnivores. I mean, look at those big teeth. That is scary. But it still wasn't going quite how I wanted, and so I was about to leave, and then David said, no, really, said, we've got someone who's joining who you might want to work, Laurie Marker, who's working in Namibia on cheetahs. What about working with her? I was like, finally, a big cat, Africa, everything's finally coming together. So, and I knew about Laurie, her work was incredible. I flew out to Africa, I was sort of 21, and I'm really ashamed to say this now looking back, but as I flew, I vividly remember for the first time looking out through that little scratched plane perspex window and looking down and seeing Africa kind of unroll beneath me and thinking, my God, there are lions down there, there are elephants down there. If I squint, I might be able to see one. How soon will it be before I can see them all? I didn't think for a second of the billion people that were living on this continent. And it does like literally shame me now to think about it, but I didn't think about it at all. And it was interesting though, when I worked with Laurie more, Laurie was fantastic with her work on cheetahs and coexistence, but what really struck me was her tolerance for people. And I went out there and I was really blinkered about lots of things. I mean, we worked quite a lot with trophy hunters out there. I hated them. I didn't want to interact with them. I thought they were absolute scum. Laurie would talk to them and say, we have to work with everyone. We had people who used to do the most horrific things to cheetahs after they'd caught them. And Laurie again would just say, we need to make sure that everyone is brought into this fold. Often people would call us up and say, look, I've trapped this cheetah and I'm going to kill it. But I've heard that, I've seen it's got a tag. My daughter is at school. She said, I have to call you, but I'm going to shoot it. Nothing you can say will change my mind. And Laurie would say, totally fine. That is your call. It's your land. But could you please just let us come up and sort of work on the cat and get some data while it's still alive, because that's really useful. And then you can do whatever you want with it. And so we would go up and we would work on people's kitchen tables and anesthetize the cat right there and get the farmer to, measure the heart rate and just hold the drip bag and check the respirations. At the end of it all, we'd say, okay, we've taken our measurements. Now, it's yours to shoot. And not one of them ever did it. Because, of course, they'd made that connection with that animal. And you'd involved them and you hadn't talked down to them. You'd involved them as partners in this and respected their choices. And I think those lessons that Laurie was sort of teaching were much more important than about all the cheetah ecology. And so when I finally went off to start my work, I really took that, the work that sort of became Lion Landscapes. We wanted to put people at the very heart of what we were doing. So we understood that to get better in terms of resolving conflict, you have to listen to all the stakeholders. You have to be forming these partnerships. So I was there brimming with energy and enthusiasm about how on earth we were going to try to tackle some really complicated conflict issues. And particularly, for example, in southern Tanzania, we were dealing with the highest recorded rate of lion killing anywhere in East Africa. Huge amounts of lion killing. And plenty of other species as well. We would go to a poisoning event where there would be 6 dead lions and 75 critically endangered vultures. And so this was having a devastating impact on wildlife. And, we were trying to talk to people about who was killing all these animals, and we knew that it was one particular tribe that we needed to engage with. It was the Farroway who was doing lots of the lion killing. And so we thought, well, fine, we'll go and engage with them. We put up signs about, come to our meetings. Unsurprisingly, nobody came, not least because we put the signs up in English. That was a flaw. We also, we went to village meetings. We tried to get people. We thought we should talk to the elders, another flaw, because if you talk to the elders, you don't engage the warriors who are actually doing the killing. Anyway, we tried. For 2 years, they utterly refused to talk to us. We were living in little tents on village land, right amongst the Farroway, and if we went to their households, they would run away. There would be a goat left there, there would be a pot on the fire, but no one would talk to us. So it wasn't going well, and all our donors were like, where's your results? We're like, we haven't even talked to anyone. There are no results. And it started eventually, literally after 2 years of being in this field camp, we knew that people obviously were around and people were literally knowing of our work, but they would refuse to engage with us. So we would do camera trapping. That's a much better camera trap picture than it shows on that thing, by the way. But we would do camera trapping for carnivores. We get lots of people's, lots of nice carnivore images. But also, it was very clear that people knew we were there, but were showing us what they thought about our project. And so it was clear there was this kind of weird dialogue going on, but they were kind of telling us they didn't really want to engage in quite the way we were expecting. I have asked this guy the permission to show this ass, by the way. He was fine with it. He's quite happy that he's famous around the world for this. Anyways, this wasn't the engagement we were looking for. And about 2.5 years in, we put up solar panels at camp just to charge our laptops. And then the Farroway came to charge their mobile phones. And it was the first time I was like, and it's, again, so obvious looking back. Instead of inviting them to our meetings and saying, why don't you come and help us? We did something that actually helped them. And so they use their mobile phones as much as anyone else does to send, information on livestock prices, or if children are missing in the bush, or, to send funny WhatsApp memes around. So finally, they didn't have to walk 20 kilometers to charge their phones. There was a station right there they could do it. So people would turn up, and they would sort of sullenly look at you while waiting for their phone to charge. So there was some engagement, but it wasn't exactly going to set the place on fire. But it was a start. But we finally got a chance to build some trust about 3 years into it all, when we were sitting at camp one night and we were getting so frustrated because there was so much lion killing. No one would talk to us. We were just a charging station. That wasn't what the aim of the project was. And we were sitting there at camp one night and finally we heard what was clearly the sound of a celebratory a celebration after a lion hunt. So people were making lion sounds, they were singing, they were dancing, they were banging their spears. And we thought, right, that's it. We're just going to go up there and talk to them right now. And so we walked off through the bush, and we got about halfway up to this sort of homestead up on the hill. And it was pitch black. It was a moonlit night, but it was really cloudy. And about halfway up there, all three of us stopped in the bush, and we got that prickling feeling on the back of your neck. And we thought, God, what is it? Is it a lion? Is it a leopard? There's something here that's not right. And as the clouds parted for a minute, the moonlight came down, and we were entirely surrounded by a group of warriors with their spears up. And then the clouds went back, and we were plunged into blackness, and I thought, oh my God, this is how we're going to die. This is ridiculous. And thank God, one of the guys in Safari who was with us said, okay, it's a VT, wait, we're just trying to do research. And the head of the Young Warriors stepped forward, Shabani, who we work with a lot now, and he said, my God, he said, you have no idea. Apparently, there'd been lots of cattle rustling between the Maasai and the Farroway going on, and there'd been some killings of people on either side. And they said, we thought you were Maasai coming to steal our cattle, so we were going to spear you. And they said, we listened, and we realized no Maasai makes that much noise walking through the bush. And so we were like, fair enough. So that saved us at least, our clumsy nature. And they said, if you're this desperate, then talk to us. And we were like, we've been trying. And they said, well, you talk to the elders, you should have talked to us, blah, blah, blah. And we said, fine. Will you please talk to us? And they said, yes. So they finally came down to camp the next day to talk to us. And it was great. We got to actually sit with them and explain what we were doing as the project. And we said, we are not Wildlife Division. We are not the police. We're not the parks. We're not trying to tell you what to do. All we're trying to do is understand if there is a way that we could build a conservation program that reduces killing, but also benefits you. And it was a great meeting. There was real enthusiasm about working together. Not least because people brought a lot of home-brewed banana beer, which really lubricates any. I mean, I loved that elephant one last night, but this really is a top-notch. And so we had this great meeting, and it was the high point of the project. We were like, we're going to do it. We're going to understand everything and move forward. And within a week, that same group of warriors went out, and they killed 7 lions right around our camp. And this was by far the lowest point of the project. We were just like, it felt like such a kick in the teeth that people were taking this engagement and throwing it back in your face. And I called up Leela Hazar, who runs Lion Guardians. I said to her, I can't do it anymore. It's just impossible to do this. These people clearly don't want to work with us. And she said, this is a test. She said, they know you care about lions, but in this meeting, you've told them you care about the communities. So they're putting it out there, which do you care about more? Your relationship with the communities or your desire to protect the lions? And so she said, you've got to do nothing. And it was the best advice I've ever gotten. It sort of resonates from this conference, because if I didn't know someone who'd been through that experience, who understood the complexities, I would have reacted totally differently. But because I had someone to reach out to who understood that and had been in that situation, we took this advice, we did nothing, we measured the bodies, they knew, we knew, nothing else happened. And then about a week later, they called us down and they invited us to their traditional meeting. And they said, now we want to work with you. And we work with them to this day. And we've built up a great relationship working with them. And it's still very up and down. Any of you who know, it's never flawless. But this was the start of them seeing that actually we were willing to put them first and our relationship with them first. And that is huge for building trust. And when we started to talk to them about what was needed, we did all the basic normal things. We knew that costs of conflict, debt predation was a major issue. So we focused on reducing their conflict and through things like reinforcing livestock enclosures, fairly standard things. But this was clearly never going to be enough. And so we worked a lot on benefit programs. People said, as we've just heard, those major costs of conflict, people didn't have benefits that outweighed the costs. So we asked them what benefits they would need. They said the normal sorts of things: education, veterinary medicine, clinics, healthcare, school feeding, all these kinds of things. So we built up a lot of programs around delivering community benefits. And this was great. It was really good. People were super happy, But the wildlife killing largely continued. And we were, again, a bit frustrated. We're like, we're doing all these things that were meant to help, and it's not really helping. Apart from the fact it's helping people, which is great. But some of our donors were like, where's the conservation impact? And of course, we realized what we were failing on was tying those benefits specifically to wildlife. People liked the benefits, so they liked the project, but they still hated the lions. And so we thought, well, how on earth can we bring these better together? At the same time, we were doing camera trapping. Our camera traps were getting stolen. It was all falling apart slightly. So we decided to bring this together and develop something that we call community camera trapping. And this is an approach where rather than us do the camera trapping, the communities do it, and they decide where to place them, who does it, and it's a very sort of jointly developed thing. It takes quite a while, but the communities decide how many points each animal should get. So each animal they trap on the camera trap gets a certain number of points, and these translate directly into community benefits. So there are more points for conflict-causing species, more points for endangered species, but this is all discussed within the community at which species they really value and which species cause them issues. And we take away points if the animal's snared, etc. So there's lots of, it ends up being reasonably detailed, but it's really strongly developed with them. So I had suggested a simple way of 1 to 5 points, and they were like, you're way too cheap. We want thousands of points. And I was like, well, it doesn't actually matter, but well, fine, it doesn't matter, so fine. Let's have 1,000 points. So a dick or something gets 1,000 points. You know, bigger species get, so primates will get 1,500 points. It's per individual animal. So that would get you 2,500 points. We give more for carnivores because we're biased. The top spot is an African wild dog at 20,000 points. And as I said, it's per individual animal. So this spot gave them 340,000 points. But interestingly, this waterhole used to be an absolute hotspot for snaring and for poisoning, because it was the only waterhole in that area on village land. And so it was regularly huge amounts of wildlife killing here. There was a wild dog den just beside it, and they used to burn it out every time it was active. As soon as they realized that this waterhole could get them loads and loads of points, they legally protected the camera traps, they protected the waterhole, they stopped the snaring, and that all came from the community deciding to do it. So a huge change. We had nothing to do with that. But then those points then translate every quarter into extra healthcare, education, and veterinary benefits. And this is a program that's really been useful for us. We're scaling it up to lots of different countries, places that are interested, seeing where it works, where it doesn't. If anyone's interested, I know various people have already emailed, we're happy always to talk and to see where it might work elsewhere. Because that wildlife is now a really important driver of human development. And it's really important that we don't just focus on kind of methods of how we want people to live, but how do we incorporate conservation within their livelihoods? So we're focusing on things like developing, wildlife-friendly livestock products. There'll be lion-friendly certification, the kinds of things that many of you will be considering, but how do we get these benefits tied to conservation and back to communities, not just getting benefits back to communities without that clear relationship? And we are seeing, I said I wouldn't wow you with science, so this is this is the pinnacle for me, bar graphs. I didn't even make them. But this is, you can see interestingly how this was kind of our initial work from 2010 to 2015 when we worked a lot on reducing attacks to people. And we thought we were doing and we were delivering benefits, but those benefits weren't tied to the wildlife. As soon as from sort of 2018 onwards, we started to tie it to the wildlife. It had a really important shift. So these are the people who receive personal benefits. It's gone up now. Still, only about 40% of people say they receive benefits from large carnivores specifically in their area. They're the most conflict-causing, but it's still a major shift from how it was. These are the people who think it's very good to have other wildlife, this is non-carnivores, within a day's walk of their household. And again, this is transformed compared to how it was before. So the majority of people now think it's good or very good to have those animals. And for the first time, interestingly, now we are seeing more people want lions, for example, to increase or to stay the same on village land than to decrease or disappear. And this isn't just people telling us what we want to hear in a survey. Obviously, that's always a risk. But we are seeing it. We are seeing breeding groups of lions on village land. We're seeing more detections on our camera traps. We're seeing people, if they catch animals, want to release them back in, etc. And we're having a much, much better focus overall on people at all levels. And this is within the communities, making sure we reflect their views, but also within our teams and building up really strong African-based teams to lead this project and make sure it makes sense from their point. And we're thrilled today to have Nyasatu here and Wieston, both from our Tanzanian program. And it's amazing to have them who bring such energy and passion and ability from the field and bring it out to Oxford to meet you guys, to learn from you, and to really see how we can take that back to the field and make it even better. So ultimately, this is just a way of saying that people are the heart of everything we do. We know that in conflict. I certainly know it now. I didn't used to. I know it now. But people are the heart of all of this, and that's the aim of the next 3 days. Like, the whole point of you all coming together, as Alex has touched on, is to make those relationships, learn from each other, have fun, use those long tea breaks, and just enjoy yourself, and hopefully it will help us all be better at what we do and help make things better for people and for wildlife. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you so much, Lisa, for that wonderful range, actually. I loved how we went from the global to the very local specific example, and the always wonderful stories that Amy has for us. We are kind of 5 minutes ahead of schedule, and I would like to suggest that unless there's any burning questions right now, that we go ahead and have our coffee break and maximize the chance to talk to each other. Shall we do that? Yep. Okay. And we'll see you back here for keynote session at 11:15.